coming on in. Welcome back to the Convo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pastor Jardula.
And I'm Fiorella.
And we got a great show for you today. As we know, yesterday somebody made a big presidential speech, fam. He looked really good. He had the flags behind him. He had the podium. He had the whole tone and demeanor yesterday of looking presidential. Who had that speech, fam?
Bernie Sanders. But breaking news, fam. Remember,
Oh, that's right. Breaking news.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders is leaving the White House. She's leaving Donald Trump. So we kind of just want to let you guys know.
Yeah.
Real quick, because that's
that
actually
one
a really
lasted a long
good thing.
time.
Yeah, it did last a long time.
Is it a good thing? Who's
I
going to
think
come in? Exactly.
yeah.
What donkey's coming in to replace him? Everybody was a good idea when people left. Then we had a guy named Tony Scaramucci, or we used to call him Tony Grab Your Gucci Scaramucci. He came on and the guy was a friggin' train wreck. Thank God he was fired like 2 weeks later. But I can't wait to see who's next.
Okay. Well, so Bernie Sanders, as you know, many of you know, gave a really great speech yesterday, and there's something that I want to tie this to foreign policy later, but I want to start off by kind of going through the major parts of his speech. I went through the entire thing and I cut it down to like 23 minutes, and then I looked at each little part that I thought was important and that everybody needs to hear, because I know a lot of people rag on Bernie for his lack of foreign policy, as far as he hasn't been as astute as Tulsi, and he didn't talk about election integrity when 2016, after all of that stuff happened. However, he is bar none as far as the domestic economic policy of our country. And this is where he's actually kind of coming out of the closet and saying he's a democratic socialist. So let's get started with it, Johnny.
Can I ask you a question, though, real quick? What overall grade, before we get started, just what overall grade would you have given him yesterday? Because I gave him a B+. But, yeah.
No, he definitely got an A.
I
definitely got an A.
Well, we disagree.
Domestic policy, absolutely A+.
Domestic's
A+.
just not enough.
Well, yes, but here, that is what I want to tie it to at the end.
Definitely.
Yeah. So let's start at 0 minutes.
And let me begin by saying, my friends, we are in the midst of a defining and pivotal moment for our country and the planet. And with so many crises converging upon us simultaneously, it is easy for us to become overwhelmed or depressed, or even to throw up our hands in resignation. But my message to you today is that if there was ever a moment in the history of our country where despair was not an option, this is that time. If there was ever a moment where we had to effectively analyze the competing political and social forces which define this historical period, this is that time. If there was ever a moment when we needed to stand up and fight against the forces of oligarchy and authoritarianism, this is that time. And if there was ever a moment when we needed a new vision to bring our people together in the fight for justice, decency, and human dignity, this is that time. In the year 2019.
Okay. What did you think of that, Pasta?
I mean, it was great. It's a great way to start off. Like I said, when I first started watching the speech, I was like, wow, this is like one of those, I don't know if you remember, and we were kind of pissed off of it when Hillary Clinton kind of was like avoiding Bernie Sanders when Bernie Sanders was still there, and she was just trying to engage with Trump because she was like trying to set this image that it's just going to be her and Trump anyways. I think Bernie's done a little bit of this right here, where he's just kind of said, okay, listen, we might be in a primary, and I'm not going to disrespect my opponents or avoid them, but I'm going to show you right here I'm presidential. And this was like, Trump, you want to see what it's like to be presidential? Let me show you.
Right. The whole setup with the flags and the colors and all of it is extremely presidential. And I want to point out that has been a lot of people who have felt really down with the polls and with just the way things have been going with Biden and all of these establishment candidates, even the Warrens coming out pretending to be progressive when they're not. And there have been a lot of people that are like, damn, like, I don't think he can win. This sucks. Like, they're going to do it again. They're going to cheat him again. And this is kind of him bringing you back and being like, look, like, I understand that this is tough. The economy is shit. You know, we have climate change going on. But if there's ever a moment for you to not give up, this is it. And this is where we have to push a little bit further. And Johnny, did we stop it too early or? Okay, yeah, let's continue it for a little bit longer because he says something really important here.
The United States and the rest of the world face two very different political paths. On one hand, there is a growing movement toward oligarchy and authoritarianism in which a small number of incredibly wealthy and powerful billionaires own and control a significant part of the economy and exert enormous influence over the political life of our country. On the other hand, in opposition to oligarchy, there is a movement of working people and young people who, in ever-increasing numbers, are fighting for justice. They are the teachers taking to the streets to make certain that
you have two choices right now. You have the choices of going towards a fascist Bolsonaro type of scenario, or you have the choice of going towards the people, a populist movement like the AMLOs or something similar to what's going on in the Green Party in Germany. There is that counter movement going on. Nowhere in that do you see a sort of centrist, moderate movement picking up because it just hasn't done anything for people. Yeah. So he's recognizing that there are two choices. So either you're going to choose someone like a Bernie Sanders or something similar to that, or you're going to choose someone like Donald Trump or a fascist. So it's just not going to work. And I think it's very important that he points it out because that is the ultimate big picture that we're looking at.
Well, I also want to say that the centrists that we have, what we call centrists nowadays, the neoliberals, they're fascists themselves too as well. Yeah. All the censoring of political news out there and stuff and everything on the left, they did it to Alex Jones. Now they're coming for us. They keep demonetizing. They only want the state's voice, their voice, to be heard. So that's their form of fascism. You know, we see the fascism in the form of, you know, racism almost, you know, when it comes to Donald Trump and on this other side, the Bolsonaros. But there is another form of fascism right there. And people don't want to deal with it no more. They're either going to go one way or the other. So he is presenting himself as the other option out there, and that's why the show is going to be a great show because we're going to talk about it in other places too as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so at 4 minutes and 11 seconds, he starts giving us some numbers.
Numbers. Fam, I want numbers.
People want to hear the numbers.
Give me the numbers. Give me the raw data. Give it to me. Now.
Reform. Now, when we talk about oligarchy, let us be clear about what we mean. Right now, in the United States of America, 3 families control more wealth than the bottom half of our country, some 160 million Americans. The top 1% own more wealth than the bottom 92%. And 49% of all new income generated today goes to the top 1%. In fact, income and wealth inequality today is greater in the United States than in any time since the 1920s. And when we talk about oligarchy, it is not just that the very rich are getting much richer. It is that tens of millions of working class people in the wealthiest country on earth are suffering under incredible economic hardship, desperately trying to survive. Today, nearly 40 million Americans live in poverty, and tonight, some 500,000 Americans, including many veterans, will be sleeping out on the streets. About half of our country lives paycheck to paycheck, as tens of millions of our people are an accident, a divorce, a sickness, or a layoff away from economic devastation.
Okay, so he's giving us the raw numbers here, and later on he also goes to talk about how wages have remained stagnant for the last 40 years, if you go with inflation, because as everything has been rising, the cost of living has been rising, our wages have remained pretty much the same.
Yeah, that's your centrism for you. That's your neoliberal policies, your austerity. It's driven us to a point where they're either going to the right or the left. The numbers don't lie. And that's why he's explaining the democratic socialism. And he says somewhere in the speech, I don't know if we clipped it, if you lay down the platform next to democratic socialism, it's almost hand in hand. And every single time along the way in our history, they've tried to frame social programs as socialist as being bad. Social Security, bad. Even the money that costs for roads and infrastructure, bad. It's a form of socialism.
As they're taking it, especially the boomer generation. It is very, and this isn't an attack necessarily on every single boomer, but the fact is that a lot of them are voting for someone like Biden, and they're taking their Social Security checks, and they refuse to give that to the next generation. And this is kind of calling out their hypocrisy. Like, I'm gonna call out FDR. You guys all benefited from FDR. And you know what? This is what I want to do for this generation. So that is Bernie calling out the hypocrisy of these people. And it's entirely valid. It's entirely valid, and it rings true to a lot of the other generations who didn't get to go to school for free, who aren't going to get Social Security, who have to pay so much money that they cannot afford a house, especially in places like California. And he's pretty much throwing it in their face. And so he's going to continue talking a little bit more about how it's such a low standard of living that this generation is now, for the first time ever, experiencing a lower standard of living than the generations before it, which is, he says, unacceptable. As well as the life expectancy of people. He talked about West Virginia, where Paula Jean Swearengin ran a great campaign. West Virginia, there was an 18-year difference between the wealthy county in Virginia, in the state of Virginia, that was only 300 miles away, versus the poor in the reference of the age men, the life expectancy of men. So it was like an 82 years for the wealthy and 63 years for the poor, which is ridiculous. Yeah. And so he's going to continue talking about now on an international level what's happening.
I think people have to take a look at this and see,
when
you see those statistics. So you got to see what's really going on. I mean, we're so kind of like programmed to think that this money system, this monetary system, is just the rule of law. It's the rule of God. It's the way things are. It's like, no. We were talking the other day, fam. I think if we spread everything out, like from what the oligarchs have, the rich, each individual will have the cost of $400,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. This is resource. This is life.
Yeah.
And right now we've been so tainted and so misled that the uber rich are just like, up there and across the world. This whole weekend, me and Johnny were watching Kazakhstan. Where else, fam? Albania, right? Hong Kong, all around the world, there's uprisings. People are going on. It's time to grab a fork and knife and start eating the rich.
Yummy.
Let's go. What? That's it. Eat the rich. I can cook the rich really good.
I'm sure you can.
I got a oligarch bolognese that'll blow your head. An oligarch
you can make a pasta bolognese.
Oh, I got a plutocrat.
Nine.
I'm sorry. What you're doing? I got a plutocrat carbonara. Right? You know what I'm saying? Woo! Like to get a Rothschild steak.
Around. Our younger generation will, for the first time in living memory, have a lower standard of living than their parents. And that is not acceptable. Globally, the situation is even more shocking. With most of the world's wealth concentrated among a very few, while billions of people have almost nothing. Today, the world's richest 26 billionaires, 26, now own as much wealth as the poorest 3.8 billion people on the planet, half of the world's population. But the struggle we are...
Oh my God,
Isn't
fam.
that ridiculous? I mean, say those numbers out loud. Just say them.
26 billionaires own as much wealth as the bottom 3.8 billion people, almost half the population.
This isn't just an issue, like Pasta was saying, about us in the United States alone. This is an issue that has been happening throughout the world. People don't like to hear the word conspiracy theory, and it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. There are a select few of elites that control the majority of the world and therefore control the majority of the money and have the power and control how it runs. And Bernie Sanders pointing this out is extremely it's extremely rare for an American president, at the very least, to do that. And because we'll see it in socialist countries, we'll see Maduro talk about that all the time. But to have someone like Bernie Sanders say it in America, you guys can think about all the few presidents that have said that, or the few activists who have said that, and where they've ended up. So this kind of started worrying me when he started talking about that. I'm like, he just put a target on his back.
He did. Well, I mean, but he saves himself at one point. We'll get to that too as well. But we talked about this too. Johnny and I were talking. Johnny Pesto, Johnny Wi-Fi as of this morning because we couldn't get our internet working. Johnny got Johnny Wi-Fi. But, what do they really want? Do they want a new world order? Is it just about, what I'm saying? Or they just want to mount a massive amount of greed? I mean, if aliens came and probed us, what would they say? They'd say, like, one small group of people took all the money and resources from all these bunch of group people, and you know what we're doing? We're taking it laying down. We need to take back that power. Exactly. Now, how do we take it back? That's the whole big question. But I love the way Bernie Sanders has been navigating the water. I love the way Tulsi's been navigating the water. Once again, though, we got to be careful because you think about the targets on their backs. But we'll talk a little bit more about that after. Let's get to the next part because...
So there's the first FDR quote, because he quotes FDR 3 times. So
Franklin
this is the first...
Delano Roosevelt.
At 11 minutes and 56 seconds, we have the first FDR quote, and it's pretty powerful. Pretty powerful, fam. It's like FDR rose from his grave. It spoke through
like
Bernie.
Today, the quest for transformative change was opposed by big business, by Wall Street, by the political establishment, by the Republican Party, and by the conservative wing of FDR's own Democratic Party. And he faced the same scare tactics then that we experience today. Red baiting, xenophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism. In a famous 1936 campaign speech, Roosevelt stated, and I quote, "We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace, business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, war profiteering. They had begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. We know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob." And Roosevelt concluded, and I quote, "Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred."
I know that's what you want to talk right there, fam.
I mean, that was pretty savage, and because and then he goes on to say, well, it seems like it could be used right now, haha. He makes like a little joke, like, because it does. I mean, if anyone heard it and didn't know that it was FDR, they would think he said that.
Yeah,
because that's exactly what's happening. We're seeing the mainstream media attack him. We're seeing the mainstream media attack Tulsi. We're seeing the mainstream media and the political establishment come after and try to censor the very two people who are trying to pretty much make everybody aware of how dire the situation is and how corrupt everything is because they don't want to lose their power. And so he's literally calling them out. And he even said red baiting, which is interesting to me because he's obviously put out the Russian narrative multiple times. So I think there is a little bit of Bernie that I feel like he is being advised to act a little hold back a little bit, because if we look at the Bernie from the 80s, he was a lot more outspoken about against the political establishment, and he was more foreign policy oriented if we look at the Bernie in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's changed. I actually think that he is in this, and he's playing the political game, and he's doing that for a reason, and I'm going to get to that reason a little bit later.
Yeah, I think that if you look at one of Bernie's old speeches when he was talking about, we don't have a major enemy, talking about, when all the funding. Who are you worried about, Iraq? Who are you worried about, Panama? If you don't remember that beautiful speech that he had, and he was old school about that, about us spending all this money on the military. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, everything's suffering back home. The reason with Karen, we can't have nice things. We're spending all this money over there, and it's nothing over here. And this was just an amazing speech, and this was an amazing part of it because he has been kind of throwing out that Russian narrative, that red bait narrative. Mm-hmm. But at certain times, he's seen, people have just gotten ridiculous about it.
Right.
That they call you a Russian bot just because you disagree with them.
Right.
So I'm glad he kind of tempered that on that side. Well, once again, Bernie's playing all sides. He's playing the flute, so he's doing a great job of it.
He's been, let's keep in mind, he's been at this for years, and nobody was listening to him then. He also starts talking about how democratic socialism is the way to defeat extremism. And this is what we want to get to, because the majority of people still have a problem hearing the word socialism in this country. So he has to tie it back to how is this going to defeat what we're facing.
I think he's stuck with that label now, and I'm going to stuck with it. I'm going to own up to it right now. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to talk about what democratic socialism is. Because if you're going to call you the democratic socialism, I'm going to prove to you why democratic socialism is better. And he used to always do that. It's not socialism. It's democratic socialism.
Which kind of bothers me still, but I understand why he's doing it at the same time.
Because there's still a free market. He wants everybody in their capitalistic minds to think, hey, you can
Socialism doesn't mean the abandonment of a free market. And
I know.
We'll get
it
to
has
that
later. Stigma, though. Yeah. A lot of people are just uneducated about it. So, yeah. Go right ahead, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
We can never forget that President Roosevelt was reviled by the oligarchs of his time, who berated these extremely popular programs as socialism. Similarly, in the 1960s, when President Lyndon Johnson brought about Medicare, Medicaid, and other extremely popular and important programs, he was also viciously attacked by the ruling class of this country. And here is the point. It is no exaggeration to state that not only did FDR's agenda improve the lives of millions of Americans, but the New Deal was enormously popular politically and helped defeat far-right extremism. And let us name them.
Just let it go. Just let him go. Let him name them.
They are Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, and giant agribusiness.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he literally calls them out by name. By name. And of all these people, he's not taking any money from any of these people. He's not even, he's literally working against them. And that's what I love about him is that, yes, this is domestic policy, but I think he's very well aware of what's going on foreign policy-wise. But there is someone else that's doing even more on that, which, again, I want to get to that in a minute at the end because it'll tie right into what you're going into. But I'll let you guys know my theory on that.
I love the, well, we'll get into that. I love the exact enemy, knowing your enemy. You know what I'm saying? These lobbyist groups, these big pharma, military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, he named all 7, even big agro nowadays with Monsanto and all that, and that's who is exactly pointing the finger on. He knows exactly who's against them, and he wants to let everybody know who the big enemy is so we can fight them. Because we need to do it together from the bottom up, right, fam?
Right. And the thing is he's also enacting legislation that is directly attacking these
Absolutely.
people. He's not just having plans. He doesn't just have plans. He's actually doing stuff legislatively to actually help this. So
Yeah. What's next?
he's talking about the economic freedom. What does it mean for economic rights?
Look at
So
the
just
time.
go
All
to I know.
1627.
Yeah, just go to 1627.
Authoritarian tyranny. We must recognize that in the 21st century, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, economic rights are human rights. And that is what I mean by democratic socialism. To realize this vision, we must not view America only as a population of disconnected individuals. We must also view ourselves as part of, and I quote, an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny, end quote, as Dr. King put it.
Yeah, so he's trying to basically take away the stigma that democratic socialism is a dirty word. Like Dr. King talked about it. And yes, Dr. King spoke about it. And in fact, the more Dr. King spoke about it is when he was targeted, because the more he was talking not only about the civil rights of black people and the civil rights movement, he was tying that to economic justice. And what I say time and time again, and I know Pasta says time and time again, is that we have to tie our social justice issues to economic justice, because without economic justice, you have nothing.
Yeah.
You don't have that mobility. You're only going to have the symbolism of having that justice, but you're not really going to have that justice. And a lot of people criticize Bernie for focusing on that, for focusing on the fact that we are all in this together, that these people are trying to divide us up. But that is the reality of the situation, is that is the truth. That is what they're doing. They're using these constructs to divide us up. But he always mentions and never forgets that there is this plight that has to be recognized. And I love how he actually does that.
Yeah, I mean, I know some of us want to crush the whole monetary system we have right now, and that would change everything. But I think he's talking about in this environment, if, finances and money means everything, their human rights are economic rights. Everything from your food, from your, from your housing, it all comes through economics. So when you have economic rights, you're actually producing human rights. And we've been saying it all the time. It's still an open-ended case for us. We still talk about it a lot when it comes to, racial justice versus economic justice. Which one is important? Are they equally important? I think that's what everybody would say, is they equally important. But which one would, if we fixed one, would it help the other? If we fixed the other, would it help it? I think it's an open discussion. We can continue to talk about it.
Yeah, Pasta and I want to have a discussion with Nico, but he had to go
Nico's
take care of his cat.
At the vet. All right. What else we got?
So let's go to 18 minutes and 4 seconds, because this kind of goes along with what we're saying. Are you really free if you don't have the power to take care of yourself and have a normal life? Are you really free? Because this country loves to say how free we are and how we're the land of the free and the home of the brave. But really, are we?
Actually means. Ask yourself, what does it really mean to be free? Are you truly free if you are unable to go to a doctor when you are sick, or face financial bankruptcy when you leave the hospital? Are you truly free if you cannot afford the prescription drugs you need in order to stay alive? Are you truly free when you spend half of your limited income on housing and are forced to borrow money from a payday lender at 200% interest rates? Are you truly free if you are 70 years old and forced to work because you lack a pension or enough money to retire? Are you truly free if you are unable to go to a college or a trade school because your family lacks the income? Are you truly free if you are forced to work 60 or 80 hours a week because you cannot find a job that pays you a living wage? Are you truly free if you are a mother with a newborn baby, but you are forced to go back to work immediately after the birth of that child because you lack paid family leave? Are you truly free if you are a small business owner or a family farmer who is driven out of business by the monopolistic practices of big business? Are you truly free if you are a veteran who has put his or her life on the line to defend this country and tonight will be sleeping out on the streets? To me, the answer to those questions in the wealthiest nation on earth is no. Under those conditions, you are not truly free.
Okay. Yeah, so
He's tying it together.
He's literally saying that you're not free.
Yeah.
Like, that is a very, like, the Republicans are going to be like, Bernie is anti-American. Even the Democrats, he doesn't love this country. They're going to all say that, but really, he does, because he's literally telling you how this is a form of slavery. It's a form of slavery through wage slavery, because you have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet, to barely get by, or your one job isn't enough. And even if you work 40 hours a week, people are sleeping in their cars, which is what he regurgitated when he went to talk to Disney workers, and which is now why Disney is paying their workers a living wage, at least here. And it's very important that people take that and don't get offended, because it's the reality of the situation is none of us are free unless we can freely live our lives with dignity and the way we should be living.
Yeah. With economic justice, we talk about too as well. You know what I'm saying? It's and it's this whole stigma when you talk about democratic socialism or socialism as a whole. Republicans immediately say, "Well, that infringes on our freedoms." It's not freedom. You know what I'm saying? He's saying, okay,
Right.
Really, if that's the argument,
Right.
And you talk about, we have to stick in this capitalist system because it's freedom, are you really free if you can't really meet the everyday standards, the living costs that are put in front of you? Are you free if you can't afford to pay your rent if you live paycheck to paycheck? Are you free if you can't go to the doctor when you have a pain in your chest? Are you free if you can't afford your insurance or your car payment and they come and repossess it? How are you free from this whole mindset that we've been sold as a little child, what we were taught in history class, what we were taught in school? Are you really free? Because now, for the first time in human memory, are we living human memory? We're living, and we're faced with a lesser standard than what our parents had, and it's still going down further and further.
And to close it out, Johnny, let's do at 20 minutes and 32 seconds all the way through, and then here.
We can't do our stuff. We have to go jump to the James.
Bill of Rights that establishes once and for all
James,
that every American, regardless of his or her income, is entitled to the right to a decent job that pays a living wage, the right to quality health care, the right to a complete education, the right to affordable housing, the right to a clean environment, and the right to a secure retirement. Over the course of this election, my campaign has been releasing and will continue to release detailed proposals addressing each of these yet to be realized economic rights. We will also address the attacks that are being launched every day against the civil rights and civil liberties of our people. And let me be absolutely clear. Democratic socialism means, to me, requiring and achieving political and economic freedom in every community in this country. When I state that the only way we achieve these goals is through a political revolution. A revolution in which millions of people get involved in the political process and reclaim our democracy by having the courage to take on the powerful corporate interests whose greed is destroying the social and economic fabric of our country. At the end of the day, the 1% may have enormous wealth and enormous power, but they are just 1%. When the 99% stand together, we can transform society. My friends, these are my values, and that is why I call myself a democratic socialist. At its core is a deep and abiding faith in the American people to peacefully and democratically enact the transformative change that will create shared prosperity, social equality, and true freedom for all. Thank you very much.
So to just kind of wrap it up here, basically he's saying we're going to have an economic bill of rights, which is extremely important because a lot of people like Andrew Yang, for instance, because he offers you UBI. $1,000 a month, you get $1,000 a month, I get $1,000 a month, we all get $1,000 a month. The problem with UBI without a minimum wage, because he's not for a $15 minimum wage, is that's a kind of neoliberal tactic. This is why it was proposed by certain neoliberal economics, because that allows them to actually be in control and not necessarily guarantee you a job, guarantee you a living wage. And $1,000 doesn't get very far a month if you don't have a job. So also, it's going to come out of Social Security. It's going to come out of either taxes. You don't know where that's going to come out of. That's the problem I have with Andrew Yang's theory. But if you have something established, like an economic bill of rights where you have a federal jobs guarantee and you have a right to affordable housing and you have a right to Medicare for all, that is socialism. That is literally giving the people, the collective, the basic needs to survive. And only then are you able to implement something like UBI to where it's actually going to be by and for the people. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So I think Bernie is setting us up for the next stage, which is going to be us having to deal with automation. And this is why that's very, very important. But fam, I know I wanted to tie it up to the fact of Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is Bernie on foreign policy. She, as far as foreign policy, is bar none. I mean, she goes after the military-industrial complex, has talked about, frankly, about pardoning Assange. She has talked about no hands off Venezuela, but she can do that because she's not labeling herself as a democratic socialist. She's against labels. She is entirely against labels. You ask her about that, she's like, well, it's not a left or right issue. You know, this is a policy issue. And this is why she's so good at getting the Republicans and getting the independents and getting all these people. That's on foreign policy. On the other hand, we have Bernie Sanders on domestic policy. Bernie Sanders on domestic policy is hardcore, and he doesn't go on the foreign policy. But this works perfect because she is going super hard on the foreign policy, and he is going super hard on the domestic policy. And both of them aren't really infringing upon what the other is doing domestically or foreign policy-wise. They're not getting in the way. They're not saying anything, but they're not getting in the way. They're sort of mimicking kind of what the other is doing. And I think that avoids Bernie being labeled as someone like Tulsi as an outsider. And that also avoids Tulsi being labeled as a typical Democrat who is actually more of an independent, libertarian, whatever, and getting the Republicans. I think that is the perfect match. And I think what they're doing is actually amazing, because if we can get her to, after the debates, to start getting even more popular, which she is growing, unlike the mainstream media says, I think this is the perfect way, not saying that she's going to be VP, but at least like this is what we need. Her foreign policy, his domestic policy together make the perfect combination.
All right, that's some good stuff, fam. We got to get out of here. We have somebody coming on the line. Fam's going to be back. She's going to be doing an interview with James Elia. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the voting process within the Democratic Party, particularly here in the California Democratic Party, and a lot has to tie into what had happened with the case with Jared Beck and the judge pretty much saying that it's a business and they can do what they want. It has really curved the behavior of the Democratic Party here in California, and Fam and James are going to get back into that. I'm sorry about the Lulu stuff. We just got to caught up in a little bit of time. We'll come back. We'll talk about the Lulu stuff and also what's going on in Nicaragua. For Pasta Jardula
and Fiorella Isabel, CONVO out. Thank you.